Hey, what's up and how's it going? This is Toby, and it's been almost exactly 3 years since I started learning Unity. And in today's video, I want to talk to you guys about how I got from my very first basic steps on creating simple prototypes up to creating a fully fledged AR multiplayer mobile game, which will go into the closed beta version soon and then be released into the App Store. And maybe from my journey you can also learn something, but always keep in mind that maybe the things I did and the decisions I took might not be the correct ones for you. So we'll always kind of tell you what my thoughts were behind the journey and behind the steps that I took, so that you can at least understand kind of the thoughts and why I did the things I did. So without any further ado, let's get started. So first of all, 3 years ago, I already knew that I wanted to go into AR development. I want to create some kind of augmented reality apps, games, experiences, and so on. So before actually learning anything and doing any kind of courses or so, I first did a lot of research on what tool will be the most suited for the task, because I don't think that it's always a good idea to do any course or like kind of major learning investment when the tools you use will not fit the purpose you actually do have. So the first step always should be that you should be kind of clear of what you want to build. And if you might not be, as I am, very deep into AR development, and you might want to actually do something else or something that is a bit different, then first very deeply think about what you actually want to build and what you actually want to achieve in the end, and then kind of reverse engineer what kind of tools there are to achieve this goal and which tools would fit your purpose, or maybe also your skill level, or maybe even what you like the best. And so I did that about 3 years ago, and I found that Unity would be the best tool. And the way I kind of came up with that decision is that I did not only do research on kind of what people generally recommend, but I also took a look on how big is the community, how much support would you get, because at some point, no matter what tool you use and no matter kind of how good you are in, let's say, programming and so on and so forth, you will need help at some point. And if you can't get any help, or if the community is just really small, then it will be really frustrating, because you just don't get further and you just have to experiment around all the time. And this is not really great. So having a tool that comes with a lot of community, with a lot of maybe tutorials or even forums, discussions, and resources is always a great idea. I would say that a tool should at least have a very detailed documentation. Maybe a lot of cutting-edge tools, they don't have so many tutorials yet, and maybe not the community is not so big, but at least they should have a great documentation, because if you have nowhere to kind of look up, then it would just be very frustrating, and I would not recommend to use any tool that doesn't even have a detailed documentation. So you don't necessarily need to have a community of 500,000 members like Unity has, or maybe even 1 million if you take a look at Reddit or maybe some YouTube channels. But it definitely helps, because some people in the past will probably have had the same issues that you had as well. The reason I chose Unity as well is just that it has so many XR tools, plugins and assets, starting with AR Foundation, which is the built-in tool that allows you to build to mobile as well as XR devices, and then having the meta tools, which seem also to be coming out for Unity first and just having more support on the Unity side compared to, for example, Unreal Engine. And then, of course, the tool I made already about a dozen or so tutorials on was Lightship, that I wanted to use, and that was also a major decision point of choosing Unity. Because this is a very advanced augmented reality tool that is available for mobile devices, but also XR headsets, that has features which essentially no other tool has, and it's also accessible for free, at least if you do hobby projects or personal projects. And this was also a major concern, because I wanted to kind of use these cutting edge tools. And so the way I started actually was not by immediately building augmented reality, but rather by essentially learning Unity from the ground up. So I remember that I actually bought a Udemy course for, I think it was like 15 euros or so. It was pretty cheap, but pretty good, which I did that just explained essentially how to create a normal game in Unity, explained the basics. So I found that AR at this point was an advanced concept that needed some general understanding of the tool that you are using. And if you would be starting with AR immediately, then you would kind of have a hard time because you would need to know Unity as such first. So what I would do is I would watch the tutorial for a few minutes, and then I would jump into Unity and try to replicate what the person just did. And I did it this way and not kind of immediately try to copy and replicate, kind of having the tutorial on the left and Unity on the right, because I wanted to really have a thought process behind it and try to really understand why we would do that. And I found that this kind of method of doing tutorials will yield a lot more understanding, and you will actually remember a lot better what you would have to do, because you'll kind of challenge your brain to remember what the tutor did within a few minutes. And if you do that a lot more often and consecutively, then for some reason it's just a lot easier to remember kind of what you did, and then do that yourself later on as well. And after I did that Udemy course, I went over, because there was kind of basic understanding, basic knowledge of coding and so on and so forth. I would actually go and do an even more advanced course. I think that Udemy course was about 10 to 15 hours, and it took me about, I guess, 3 or 4 weeks to complete. I spent about 3 to 4 hours daily, so actually 7 days a week. But I really wanted to understand what they're doing. So I repeated sections, and not only that, but besides what the tutor told me to do, essentially, so the features that were included in the course, let's say some kind of steering logic, I always try to expand on that. And I thought, okay, maybe we have now implemented a logic to steer a spaceship, but I also want a button that will allow me to turn on a light or whatever, you know. So I tried to implement things that weren't actually in the course by just that also weren't too far off, but that would challenge me to kind of learn something new by myself and go beyond what the course says. And after that, I actually did another course, which was a bit more advanced, and that was the one from CodeMonkey. So he has 2 courses. One would be, I think, a single player, and then even a multiplayer game. And so I did both of these courses the same way. I always watched a bit, tried to replicate it myself. Then I always tried to go beyond what was asked in the course and implement more features that I could think of, which weren't too far off, but they definitely posed a challenge. And at some point, when I was even a bit more comfortable with using Unity and the features, I waited until, for example, he said, okay, now we're going to implement feature XY. And before actually watching on how he did it, I did implement that feature by myself, just with the help of Google. Let's say if I wanted to Google something about the API or opening up the Unity docs. And then I've kind of implemented myself and compared my solution with the solution that CodeMonkey then created. And this was actually super useful. This was, in my opinion, the best way of learning it. And I also didn't use any AI or kind of automation tool for that, because I really wanted to. I think back then, 3 years ago, it wasn't so good. I think there was just not even GPT 3.5 at this point. I don't know actually, but I had to learn that myself. But I also wouldn't recommend to use it. And after doing these courses, I had a good grasp about Unity. I think it took me about 3 months to do all of that. And I definitely very thoroughly went through them and also tried to learn something myself. And after that, I went straight into AR Foundation and tried to, only with the documentation and with some basic tutorials, to set up just some basic prototypes within AR Foundation, kind of implement the different features, learn how to build them to device, and kind of get warm with that technology. And at that point in time, I was already so comfortable that I could only work with maybe some basic tutorials here and there if I wanted to kind of learn a feature from the ground up, but also used just a lot of the Unity documentation and implemented my own prototypes. And this was also the time that I started recording devlogs and tutorials. And the reason for that was, well, I like to do videos, that's one point, but I also wanted to kind of see if I could actually teach those concepts, which would prove to me that I would actually understand them and I could explain them to someone else, right? So this is kind of the next step after kind of the way I did the tutorials and build a few prototypes myself. I wanted to see if I could explain that. And that's the way I kind of got into all of these tutorials. And they proved to me that I was actually understanding the concepts that I was talking about and I was kind of implementing every day. And at that point of time, I knew that I was ready to create the first actual project. So I built a few prototypes, and I always had the deep conviction that this project that I was just building right now would definitely become a full-blown game or a full-blown app. But there were several reasons why the prototypes I did weren't actually then put into the App Store. And that is also kind of another aspect of learning development, because it's not only about the technical skills, but it's also about coming up with great ideas that are actually technically feasible, that are fun to play, and that kind of also work with the technology that you have. So a lot of those prototypes I built, they weren't so much fun, or from a user perspective, there also wasn't too much reward of playing them, especially in AR, right? So I kind of also learned the intricacies of AR development, which means it has to be worth it to play this in your own living room. And if it's something that would just play the same way in 3D, maybe it should be done in standard 3D. So that was also definitely a learning. And at some point, I came up with the concept of EVAs, which kind of combined all of that knowledge I had gained on the technical side, but also on the side of what actually is fun or brings value to users when using AR. And then I begin creating EVAs. And that definitely posed a lot of more challenges to me, because it's completely different thing to build just a prototype that you can play on your phone and only have the game scene. And then on the other hand, creating something that is supposed to be a full-blown app, which needs to have a lot more features and needs to have a lot more things working behind the scenes. And so that definitely posed a challenge to me. But I also found it extremely useful and extremely important to go through all of these steps that you need to implement in order to get a game that can then in the end be in the App Store and can be downloaded and be a full-on game experience, because you learn things on this path that you don't learn while creating prototypes. So I would recommend going through all these processes by yourself and kind of learning to create an app from the beginning to the end. But I definitely would also say that with EVAs, which is a game that features augmented reality, object detection, meshing, single player, AR, localized multiplayer, and so on and so forth, with accessories and all of that, I would recommend going with something simpler. If you're doing AR, I would rather focus on doing either a super simple multiplayer game or a bit more advanced single player game, maybe with object detection or meshing, but then keep out the multiplayer, at least in the first place, because it's definitely still hard to build AR games and definitely to test them and validate them. It's so much work, and things like AR multiplayer are still so kind of in an early phase. So I would say it's definitely important to go easy here and kind of don't make things too overcomplicated, rather focusing on providing a small but great value. And don't just think of the features and what kind of features you want to implement from a technical perspective, right? Because that's going to make things very complicated and they might not even add more fun to the game. So that's kind of my advice. All right, so that was a lot of talking, and I would be very excited to hear your opinion about AR game development, Unity development, what your path was, and if you would kind of agree with my thoughts and my approach to this, and in what kind of stage you currently are in your development journey. So I'd be happy to discuss in the comments, but until then, as always, thanks a lot for watching and see you next time.